Hello, I'm Michael Clish, and welcome to What's Up. Our editions, I want to remind you, are available for viewing anytime on fortatkinsononline.com. Today, we're at the Fort Atkinson Middle School, and we've chosen this for a very special reason. This mural you see behind me, it depicts the Rock River and some poetry by the Fort Atkinson native poet Laurie Niedecker. Laurie lived near the river, on the river, and it has a lot to do with her poetry. Joining me is the president of the Friends of Lorine Niedecker, Ann Engelman. Hello, Ann.
Hello, Michael.
Lorine has been called by literary experts, a lot of them, the Emily Dickinson of the 20th century. Behind us is a mural with the words of Laurie Niedecker, made by
Cynthia Bliss and the students of the middle school. We were delighted. One of our goals is to have a mural in every school in Fort Atkinson, and the last one is about ready to do their mural.
This is beautiful. President of the Friends of Lorine Niedecker, and the obvious question, who was Laurie Niedecker?
A lot of people ask, who is Laurie Niedecker? And when they hear about a poet, then they're thinking, oh, I don't need to hear about that. But wait, she has a lot of interesting stories. She was born on Blackhawk Island. And
yes, on the island.
On the island. And Blackhawk Island was important in her life because ultimately she was inspired by a man who wrote about his place. Louis Zukofsky, you'll hear about him too. But Poetry Magazine in 1930s was published about an objectivist movement. And basically the poets wrote about observation, about your place and about your place in it. So ultimately Lorine did that. And when we, as Friends of Lorine Niedecker, wanted people to internalize what it was that Lorine Niedecker was all about, we thought one of the best ways to do that was to get the poetry out of the books and out of the academic settings and into the into our community. And ultimately, we chose the side of a bar, Michael. And the first one, Fish, Fowl, Flood, Water, Lily, Mud, My Life, we were able to spin that then to say, as a poet, Laurie Niedecker wrote about her place. Who are you in your place? So what 6 words describe your life? And to begin to think about you in your place. So Lorine was pretty good about that. We had so much success with that. My favorite story is a mother who says that every time she stops at that stoplight, her little daughter in the back insists upon reciting Fish, Fowl, Flood, Water, Lily, Mud, My Life.
Yeah.
My favorite story, though, is the truck drivers who stop at that stoplight and look to read that, and then they go, oh.
Horns honking, and yeah.
That's right.
That's
So
right.
ultimately, when we did the second mural then, we picked another poem. It was more of a puzzle in the mural that it was. But Laurie Niedecker, as a poet here and also creating destination points in Fort Atkinson, that was another poem of I was a solitary plover, a pencil for a wing bone, asking the question, who are you in your community? She was a solitary plover. And then we can talk about the third mural, but murals have become a way for Lorine as a poet, and often people are not so excited about a poet, to become engaged in a way that is meaningful for them.
She's more than a Fort Atkinson poet.
Yes.
She is considered by the experts to be the Emily Dickinson of the 20th century. That is pretty high praise.
It is. In her lifetime on Blackhawk Island, she did not want to be recognized. She felt that if people knew she was a poet, they would treat her differently. And ultimately, they did not want to do that. She did not want to do that. So it wasn't until after her death that people began to put the dots together. Very instrumental person was Gail Raub. He was a high school teacher. He lived on Blackhawk Island as well with his wife Bonnie, and the two of them became very good friends. Luck would have it that when she died, Gail had some of her papers, and because most of the papers were burned per her request on her death.
Yeah.
So Gail happened to have those, and we began to realize just what we had here. Ultimately, she was recognized by a literary executor, Sid Corman, who lived in Japan, And ultimately in England she was published, so a lot of people internationally knew who she was before she was recognized here.
Yeah. She corresponded with poets in England and
she did.
in Japan.
Yep.
And a lot of other places. She was very similar to Emily Dickinson, who lived her whole life in Amherst, Massachusetts. In her fading years, she never even left her room.
No. Lorine traveled.
Wasn't quite that.
Right. She married late in life to
Yeah.
Al Millen, and Al Millen took her on the circle tour around Lake Superior. He also lived in Milwaukee for a while with Lorine until he retired. He taught her how to use a bus. She went down to the Milwaukee Public Library a lot, and also to the museum that was there. You can see some of the references to both of those places in her
Yes.
papers, in her poetry. We are very lucky to have those papers here, thanks to Gail and Bonnie Robb, at the museum, which has a lot of the artifacts of the collection, and the library has her personal library. That personal library was in circulation until a fellow, Carl Garton, came over from Milwaukee and said, you know, you may not want to circulate these books. This was her personal library, and to this day, it is quite an asset to Fort Atkinson. We have scholars from all over the world come.
We have it here.
We have it here.
Yes.
And it was kept here, and it will always be here.
Yeah.
So how do we let people know? We tried to use our walls in Fort Atkinson as a way to get people involved.
It's beautiful. And we have another one coming. Do we mention the artist?
The artist is Jeremy Pence. Jeremy is a local homegrown person. He and his wife moved here. I guess it's not homegrown then, is it? But he has studied greatly. He now teaches also at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He's had a solo show in Chicago. He's having a couple of his paintings be included in an exhibit in Belgium, overseas in Europe. And very, very proud of Jeremy. When we first began to look for an artist for these murals, Jeremy came to mind. His painting, his style is very fresh. And it was not necessarily in a safe keeping of Lorine. We wanted, as Lorine was contemporary in her time, Jeremy is very contemporary in his time. I really turned him loose and said, here's what the goal is. We want people to know who Lorine is, and we want to feel a connection. We want them to feel a connection. So he came up with that 6 words on a wall using the type style, the font, grandmother's typewriter. And it just took off. There were people initially who were hesitant, saying, there aren't any pictures, so why is this successful? And then it became iconic. Same with the second wall, was slightly controversial. It was not easy to just walk by and glance the meaning of that, but over time that too has become appreciated. There's a wedding venue across the street. All the bride and groom oftentimes go over to have their picture taken in front of that wall. So Jeremy, he was an important piece in making these walls successful, and people are drawn to them.
Jeremy may soon become to art in Fort Atkinson what Laurie Niedecker is to poetry.
Well, we're very proud of him and we wish him the best.
Yeah.
The initial idea for the poetry wall was his wife Cynthia's. We were trying to figure out how to have Lorine be more visible, and she suggested, let's just put words on a wall. And we all thought, what a great idea. And it
Why didn't
worked.
I think of that?
And she and her husband drank at that bar.
Yeah.
She would go to the bookstore, Al would go to the bar, and then she'd come down and meet him on that very building where that wall is.
Wow. Incredible. All right here.
All right here.
Now, if you want to know the complete story.
Yeah, this is Lorine Niedecker's biography, which was written by Margot Peters. She lives in Lake Mills, and she did 3 years of research, and wrote this book, which is available at our museum gift shop, which also has the complete collected works of Laurie Niedecker.
You seem to have a lot of bookmarks.
Yeah, well, that's all because of the things I want to be able to reference and tell the stories
Oh,
about.
I thought these were your favorite poems.
Oh, well, those too. But also there's a smaller book at the museum gift shop called America's Greatest Unknown Poet,
Yeah.
because she was known overseas but not here in
Right?
Wisconsin.
And that's not quite true anymore, but
No, not quite true, but John Lehman wrote this book, and he
Yeah.
was from Cambridge. And then if anybody wants an introduction, without tackling a tome, as it were, The Granite Pail, which the museum also has, is a good way to get started. So I think there are lots of opportunities to jump in and to figure out, why is she going to help me sort of figure out who I am in my place?
we've both read this book written by a friend of ours, Margot Peters.
Yes.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's good stories. It's not a boring biography. She tells a
No,
lot of
not at
stories,
all.
and Lorine had a life that had a lot of stories.
And a lot of interesting little historical.
Yeah, because she wasn't a stay-at-home.
No.
Dirt in the process of that, she experimented going out, and then she ultimately came home. She was a person who was of this place. She cared about this place. She cared about the things she wrote about. And so there are stories in here that make her become a very real person. We're also very lucky that Julie Chasseau, Lorine's stepdaughter, is just across the way in Milwaukee. And Julie has really also helped us learn who Lorine really was. Not just the poet, but the person.
Lived on German Street, didn't you?
Yes. You want to tell them the story about German Street?
No, you go ahead.
German Street was called German Street until World War II, and then it became Sherman Avenue.
Yeah.
They changed it.
Sherman Avenue.
That's right. That's right.
Fascinating. A lot of little things like that in the book that really...
Should we talk quickly about wall number 3?
Please, yes.
Wall number 3 took the entire poem, which is called Mergansers, stands on heads, thoughts on things, fold, unfold above the riverbeds. In this time of ours, Friends of Lorine Niedecker wanted to take some of her poems to ask people, what do you think about? What thoughts on things fold, unfold above the riverbeds along this river that we all live on? So when you think about the 3 walls together, the umbrella is, what 6 words describe you? Who are you in your place? And what thoughts on things fold, unfold above the riverbeds? It's an opportunity to take Lorine, her poetry, not be distracted by the fact that she was a poet, but take those words and turn them into something that you might personally be interested in exploring on your own. Or even in a passing, reading in a car in the back of a car seat. I think all these things are important. So I told Jeremy this would probably be the last wall, at least in my lifetime, that we would commission for him. And I think
we're out of walls anyhow.
well, I don't know, we are not, but we also were very careful because it's in the historic district of Fort Atkinson, and we would not paint a wall that was pristine Cream City brick. That was not. So we really worked with the city, we worked with the Preservation Commission, with the museum to make sure that that we followed best practices for putting something on a wall in our historic district. But I think Jeremy did an incredible job. He also stayed within the spirit of the wall, being a rough Cream City brick, but also has history because there was something back there as well. So I think we're lucky. He had a very, very full schedule, and he fit us in, and I think it's extraordinary.
And Lorine Niedecker.
I think Lorine is magical in that when she lived on Blackhawk Island, there was flooding every spring. There was muck, and there was water, and it was everywhere. And that became a very prominent theme in her poetry. I think that also speaks to us today. When the first poetry wall was done, that was in the flood of the big one, whatever year that was. 1980.
There's been so many. Who can keep track?
2008. And ultimately, the Fishfall Flood, Water Lily Mud, My Life, that was Lorine's. And I think as a woman who lived there, she was not a wealthy person. Her parents were in the beginning, but they were hit pretty hard by the Depression. Her parents were not happily married. And all of these things affected Lorine. But she, again, kept very much to herself in this little cabin that was just very small, often didn't have heat because she couldn't afford it. A lot of people got together to help her. But through the observations of her life, she made poetry. I think the easiest way to start to get to know Lorine is to take a look at her more brief poems. And again, to just let that wash over you. Some of it is complicated. Don't be intimidated by that. Just, again, let it wash over you. The sounds of her poet is lovely. The other part of this is that when the Friends began to realize that she was not well known in Fort Atkinson and Wisconsin, they were determined in 2005 to begin the Laurie Niedecker Wisconsin Poetry Festival. That festival ran for 10 years until it was it ran into the pandemic.
Yeah.
But that brought in so many people to our town. It also brought people who were interested in scholarship of Lorine. And there was a centenary that was in Milwaukee. All of those people who came to the centenary came to Fort Atkinson to learn more about Lorine. And we set up activities out on Blackhawk Island and in Fort Atkinson. That property is privately owned, but the people who own it are very generous and understand the legacy of Lorine. So ultimately, we have permission, once we say to them, we would like permission to have this group of scholars out. And so they worked with us also to ensure that the cabin would become on the National Historic Registry. It was already on the state registry, but we worked with the Historical Society to do the application so that the cabin became a part of the National Historic Registry.
It can be seen from the road. It's not
Can be
much of a
seen from the road.
road.
There's a state marker there.
Yeah.
Also, it can be seen from the river.
That's right.
And when you note the proximity of both of those buildings to the river, you can understand why Lorine was very influenced by what happens to water when it comes and you really have no control over it.
Indeed.
The Friends of Lorine Niedecker continue our work, and we are hoping that after the pandemic, ultimately we will go back to having a poetry festival. We are hoping that May 12th, which is her birthday, the Horde Historical Museum will be having a birthday party for her. We're going to wait and see how things are in the spring, but ultimately recognizing the fact that a number of artifacts, which are to be announced, will be donated newly to the museum, and that's pretty exciting
wonderful,
thing.
yeah.
So if we can fold that into her birthday party, we will invite everyone to probably a scavenger hunt at the museum to find more things of Lorine's, to celebrate these new accessioned items, and to ultimately say happy birthday to Lorine on May 12th.
Happy birthday, Lorine. That's all the time we have today. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Lorine Niedecker and her contributions to poetry to Fort Atkinson, and about the newest of the 3 poetry walls within Fort Atkinson, found on the north elevation of the hometown pharmacy building in downtown Fort Atkinson. And I'd like to thank my special guest, Ann Engelman, president of the Friends of Lorine Niedecker, for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.
And this is our last show for 2021. And on behalf of myself and the rest of the crew here, we want to wish you the very best of holidays and look forward to bringing you more programming in 2022. This is Michael Clish.